Okay, how's it going, everybody? I hope you're all doing well. Okay, so in this episode, I thought I'd try to say something about Tolstoy and his autobiographical memoir called A Confession. I have to admit something. That book always bugged me. Despite his reputation as a venerated thinker, and I'm not saying his literary works aren't great, they are. But I actually think that much of what Tolstoy says in Confession is not only quite superficial, but just deeply problematic or concerning. But anyway, before I get into some of my objections there, let me first give a very brief synopsis of this memoir so we have some kind of context to work with. Okay, so in the Confession, Tolstoy writes about his lapse into depression in his early 50s or so. Basically, he talks about succumbing to a kind of nihilism or sense of meaninglessness because he, for the first time, comes to fully realize not only the inevitability of his own death, but the eventual death or destruction of all things. This fact, this seeming futility of it all, the fact that there is no ultimate foundation or justification for his daily actions and projects, that paralyzes him and causes him to stop caring about everything, including his work, but also, remarkably, his own children. For after all, they too will die. Well, in an attempt to get out of this, he starts to seek out answers to the question of the ultimate meaning of life. He spends time asking all sorts of experts, including philosophers and scientists, but to no avail. As much knowledge as they all have, nothing they say is of any help to him. But then it dawns on him that most of the poorer, less educated people throughout history have somehow lived perfectly meaningful lives. So Tolstoy finally comes to understand that he's all the while been searching in the wrong place for the answer. What most people in history have had is, well, faith. And it's this that has sustained them and provided them with the foundation they needed. More specifically, what Tolstoy realizes is that the answer to the question of the meaning of life lies not in the domain of rational knowledge, a domain which would of course include the scientists. No, the answer lies in the realm of irrational knowledge. And this is what faith is for him, a form of irrational knowledge. And more precisely, what faith does for him is it gives him the intimation of the infinite, something beyond the impermanence that characterizes the physical world. Now, with a sense of the existence of the infinite in hand, Tolstoy finds the ultimate foundation and justification that he needs. One that, as he says, is not destroyed by suffering, privation, and death. So for him, it's faith that's the strength of life. And so with faith, he can go on to live and to care about all the things that he had cared about before. Okay, so that's a very brief summary. But now I want to get into some of the details. And in particular, there's an entire section or chapter that I want to say something about. So I mentioned that Tolstoy goes to the scientists to look for an answer to the meaning of life, right? Well, after that happens, he decides to go look for an explanation from those people in his own circles with a similar education, hoping that they might be able to help him. Well, what he discovers when he does this is that there are basically 4 different ways that those people deal with this problem of meaninglessness that Tolstoy is struggling with. So, what are they? Well, okay, the first way is just by remaining ignorant about such big questions. In other words, these particular people just don't know. They're not aware, to quote Tolstoy, that life is evil and meaningless. And because they don't know, or because they don't ever inquire about such things, they're completely happy with everything. So basically, ignorance is bliss. Now that's clearly one way of avoiding despair. But Tolstoy himself, however, says that he just can't learn anything from these people, though, and that's because, unlike them, he's definitely not ignorant. He knows with absolute certainty that life is evil and meaningless. Okay, well, the second way of confronting the problem of meaninglessness that Tolstoy saw in those around him was just to, as he says, jump into Epicureanism. Now, that's to say, if life is meaningless, then we may as well just live hedonistically and just enjoy ourselves. Now, again, Tolstoy disagrees with this strategy too. And one reason he gives is that eventually death destroys all these pleasures. In other words, you can't avoid suffering if you're a hedonist, he says. And that's because all those pleasures that you've tried to maximize will be taken away from you at death. Therefore, hedonism is not a good strategy either, he concludes. Okay, well, the third way of avoiding despair is simple. It's to kill yourself. If life is evil and meaningless, then we may as well go on to destroy it. Better not to be. Tolstoy says this is the most worthwhile action to take, and it's one that actually he wanted to do himself. And finally, the fourth way of dealing with this evil and this meaninglessness is actually the worst one, he thinks. It's the way of complete weakness, he says. It's when people know that life is meaningless and evil, they're aware of this, yet they continue to drag it out anyway, knowing full well that nothing will ultimately come of it, knowing that there is no ultimate point to any of it. Now, these are people who just don't have the courage and the strength to kill themselves, when really that is what they should do, he says. And actually, this is the category that Tolstoy seems to place himself in. He knows that he should end this fraud that is life, but he's just too weak to do so. Okay, wow. So, what are we to say about all of this? Well, to be honest, there's just so much here that I find deeply problematic. But let me just focus in on a couple of things that stick out to me as both questionable and very concerning. Okay, so let me start with Tolstoy's objection to what he calls Epicureanism. His objection to this life of pleasure, which is the second way he said people confront or distract themselves from the problem of meaninglessness. Now remember, he objected to this strategy for this reason. He said that if you live to maximize pleasure, you will only suffer when death deprives you of more. Well, okay, so here's the thing. I don't think Tolstoy understands what Epicureanism really is. You see, for Epicurus, there's a limit or a ceiling to pleasure. For him, hedonism has nothing to do with the desire for more and the constant pursuit of the pleasurable and the mentality that nothing is never enough. Sure, if that was your particular strategy in life, then yeah, you're going to be upset and suffer when age and death deprives you of the more and more pleasure that you're always after. But again, this is not Epicurus's view. For him, the pleasurable life is not about maximization. It's not about quantity. It's about quality. And it's about a life of simplicity. For him, there is such a thing as enough. For him, the truly pleasurable life is such that we have no desire for more, since more cannot give us anything that we do not already have. Now, there is deep wisdom in this, to be without the need for more, to see life as sufficient unto itself, to be happy and grateful for what you have without seeking after the infinite. Now, I wonder if Tolstoy could learn from this in some way. Okay, now that aside, what I really want to focus in on is this claim that Tolstoy keeps repeating that life is evil and meaningless. So let's start with this idea that it's very evil. So why is it evil exactly? I mean, sure, life is sometimes a mixed bag of goods. It's often not very straightforward. It's often ambiguous. It's often very anxiety producing. But why evil? I mean, certainly Homer wouldn't agree at all. After all, we're told by Achilles that it's better to be a slave of a poor man than to be king of the underworld. And Rousseau wouldn't agree either, who extols what he calls the sweet sentiment of existence, the simple pleasure of being alive. And neither would Albert Camus, who tells us that there is only one sin in life, and that is to hope for another life while avoiding the implacable grandeur of this one. So, evil? That might be going a bit too far. Okay, but let's get to the second part of the claim that Tolstoy makes, where he says that life is meaningless. Now, this, I think, can be made greater sense of. That claim, I think, has some traction. But here's the thing. I think it only makes sense if we make an important distinction with respect to two types of meaning. So, to put it bluntly, I would say that there are two types of meaning. On the one hand, there's what we might call ultimate or transcendent meaning. And on the other hand, there's what we might call local or immanent meaning. So transcendent meaning says something like whatever our meaning in life has is totally dependent on or justified by something outside of us, outside of this world. For Tolstoy, outside of the world of becoming. On the other hand, immanent meaning says that the meaning of our life comes entirely from within, from inside of this world, and not from something external to it. Okay, now it's pretty clear that when Tolstoy says that life is meaningless, at least at this stage in his autobiography, what he means is that because we're all going to die, and because death and destruction is a feature of the universe at large, then there's just no way to ground any meaning in our lives. There's no way to justify caring about anything at all. In other words, why bother to care if we all end in stench and worms, as he says, and the universe itself eventually succumbs to a big freeze? Better to kill oneself. Tolstoy then fails to recognize any immanent meaning. And of course, it turns out that the only way he can come to give life any significance at all is by going on to adopt a faith, by believing in some transcendent reality that, as he says, is absolutely not destroyed by suffering, privation, and death. In other words, the only way Tolstoy can make any sense of life is if it has an ultimate or transcendent meaning. If it doesn't, if there's no ultimate point outside of this life, then any and all meaning is completely absent. This is why he's so hard on that fourth group of people that he mentions. You know, the weak ones. Those who continue to drag life out despite knowing that nothing will come from it. Okay, well, here's the thing. Maybe he shouldn't be so hard on that fourth group. No, maybe they know something that he doesn't know. Maybe they continue to care and live life fully precisely because they know that there is nothing that comes after it. And maybe they are able to respond with love to the things and the people in their life precisely because they understand that they're precious and ephemeral. And maybe they know that more time, infinite time, doesn't add any more value to things at all. In other words, maybe they accept and embrace that all meaning is immanent. I don't know. At the end of the day, I think there's something pathological about giving up on things and not caring about one's children anymore because you realize that both you and they will one day die. Actually, I would say that if the only way you can come to care about others is if that concern is anchored in or justified by some kind of ultimate or transcendent meaning or source, then you really don't care about others. When it's all said and done, my feeling is that at the end of the day, Tolstoy's despair is the result of a lack of gratitude. You see, for him, it seems that ultimately it's only faith that restores to particular things their value. But this is to get it backwards. What it should be is this. It should be that it's the beauty and the sacrality of finite things that reestablishes our faith in life. Bye for now.